So leading up to the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, game keycards have become a very hot topic, as this has become an entire discussion about the way that the games are being handled, as game keycards are essentially going to be physical Nintendo Switch 2 games that come with a cartridge. However, the cartridge isn't going to have the full game data for the game, and you're essentially going to have to download a large piece of the game onto your microSD card or onto the system, so you're not actually getting the entire game on it. Now, I've already made a video going over kind of exactly what the pros and cons of game key cards are and why some people are disappointed by them and what it could actually mean going into the future. So if you haven't seen that video, there should be a little eye up in the corner right now. You can definitely click or tap on that if you want to go and watch that video and then come back to this one, but I'll also have it in the outro of this video if you want to go and check it out after you're done watching this one. But really, one of the biggest things that people have been wondering about game key cards is why are so many games on the Nintendo Switch 2 having game key cards, especially when it comes to third-party games, as Nintendo's own first-party games are still going to be fully on the cartridge, but it feels like pretty much every third-party game at this point is now a game key card. And that's so weird because this concept isn't new, as on the original Nintendo Switch, there were still games that were kind of like this where you had to download a portion of the game onto a micro SD card, and these physical games would have like a banner on the top of the case that would say like micro SD card required, internet download needed, or something like that, and so you would still get games like that. But the amount of those types of games was definitely much less compared to now, where on the Nintendo Switch 2, it feels like pretty much every third-party game is just a game key card. But it looks like there's a potential leak or rumor that's been going around for the past few days that's discussing why so many games on the Nintendo Switch 2 are game key cards, and it's basically talking about a pretty dirty secret that Nintendo might be hiding behind the scenes when it comes to these third-party publishers, and that is what could be causing so many of these games to appear as game key cards. So recently, when pre-orders for the Nintendo Switch 2 had opened up in Japan, there were also pre-orders that went up for a lot of the games that are going to be available. And the thing is, if we take a look at this image here of all the games, you can see here that pretty much every single game here has like that little banner on the bottom talking about how it's a game key card game. And it's just so unusual because this is something that you didn't really get with the Nintendo Switch 1, because there were definitely some games that were going to have this if they were going to be really big, expansive games, and I definitely expect that even with the Nintendo Switch 2. Like, they already announced that Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be coming to the Nintendo Switch 2. That's a game that's like 88 gigabytes even on the PS4, so I'm definitely not expecting them to be able to fit that entire game onto a cartridge, especially if they have the other games in the trilogy coming too, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. That game's 150 gigabytes even on PS5, so I'm not expecting that to be able to fit into one Nintendo Switch 2 cartridge. But if we take a look at some of these other games here, like Puyo Puyo Tetris, Sonic and Shadow Generations, like these games need to have game key cards. It's just very unusual because these are definitely games that are not going to be super like insanely big in terms of file sizes or anything, so why are these games also coming as game key cards? And well, it seems like the reason that all of this is happening could just be right here, and it really looks like that Nintendo might be hiding a potentially dirty secret when it comes to the cartridges for the Nintendo Switch 2 and how they're offering them to third-party publishers. And we can see right here in this article, it says, many Nintendo Switch 2 games may use game key cards because of limited cartridge sizes. Nintendo may have a clever strategy to encourage the adoption of game key cards. A Switch 2 leak suggests that some titles lack an appropriate cartridge size. Medium-sized Nintendo Switch 2 games are too large for the smallest media, making game key cards more economical. And all of this information is coming from Jordan, who owns the YouTube channel Physical Paradise, and apparently, according to a trusted source that he believes in, he's saying that from the information that he's heard, Nintendo is basically only offering 2 versions of cartridges to any third-party publisher who wants to put their game on the Nintendo Switch 2, and you basically have like a very cheap 1GB cartridge or a very expensive 64GB cartridge and nothing in between. This is significantly different from what we have on the current Nintendo Switch, where Nintendo actually offers an entire range of cartridges to third-party publishers to then choose which one they feel like would be the best for their game. And all of these come in different sizes, so we have a 1GB cartridge, 2GB, 4GB, 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes, and 32 gigabytes. And of course, like with any other storage medium, the more gigabytes, the more expensive the cartridge is. And so that way, a lot of developers can try to optimize their game to get it under just a certain amount to try to fit it into a certain type of cartridge. And there was a lot of different choices that developers could choose. But it appears that with the Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendo is pretty much only offering 2 different versions of the cartridges, where you have like a very cheap, I'm guessing 1 gigabyte cartridge, and then a super expensive 64 gigabyte cartridge. And this basically screws over a majority of third-party games because unless you're like a very small, simple indie game that can fit into the 1 gigabyte cartridge, pretty much every single other game is going to be bigger than a gigabyte, and you're gonna need a bigger cartridge to fit the entire game on there. But the only other size that's offered is the extremely large 64 gigabyte cartridge, which is also going to be the most expensive, and it's going to be significantly more expensive than any of the cartridges that we've had on the Nintendo Switch 1. And Nintendo is the only one who can create these cartridges because they are proprietary and only work with Nintendo Switch 2, and that's different from like universal Blu-ray discs, which we see on like the PlayStation and Xbox, where those are going to be significantly cheaper and easier to get compared to like a special Nintendo Switch 2 cartridge that's only going to work on the Switch 2. And so that's why even if you have like a really big game like we saw with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on the PS5, where that was like a 160 or something gigabyte game, and it came with 2 discs on the PS5, where one of them just had the entire data for the game and the other one was the one that you used to play the game, but you were still able to have the entire game physically and not a portion of it that you had to download online. And so if you're a pretty big third-party publisher, you can really kind of start to get the picture now, where if you start calculating all the cost of everything and breaking down all the money, you can go like, okay, it was this expensive to port our game to the Nintendo Switch 2, here's how much we want to sell it for, this is how much revenue and profit should be coming in because of that. But now at the same time, if you also want to have your game available physically, you're gonna have to spend an extremely large amount of money on a bunch of these 64 gigabyte cartridges, to the point now where the entire project might just be a loss for you, and you're going to be losing money and not really making anything back. And it's still worth kind of having shelf space inside a store so that people can see that your game is on the Nintendo Switch 2. So how can you really do that? And at that point, the game keycard becomes a really nice option because you can just buy the really cheap 1 gigabyte cartridges, put like a very small amount of the game on them, and then sell these basically at stores so that you can still have your game appear on store shelves so that people can see that the game is still on the Nintendo Switch 2, and then people would just have to download the rest of the game onto their system. And it seems like that this is the big crisis that a lot of these developers are facing, because if we take a look at the file sizes for a lot of these third-party games, it really kind of starts to make sense now if you put this kind of perspective into your head, where if you take a look at like Puyo Puyo Tetris, that's going to be a 4 gigabyte game. Sonic X Shadow Generations is going to be a 24 gigabyte game. Like if we had a 32 gigabyte cartridge, if we had like an 8 gigabyte cartridge, then I'm sure that a lot of these developers would then choose to kind of just pay a little bit of extra money to then have these games appear entirely on a cartridge. But now if the only option that you have is to get a 64 gigabyte cartridge that's going to be extremely expensive to put these types of games in, then yeah, obviously these developers would not choose that option, and they're just going to choose to buy like the really cheap 1 gigabyte cartridge so that they can have a game keycard game. Now some of you might want to bring up first-party games because it's already been confirmed that Mario Kart World is going to be entirely on the cartridge. The full game is going to be there and you're not going to have to download anything for it. But we can see right here, Mario Kart World is just going to be a 23.4 gigabyte game. And so if Nintendo only has 64 gigabyte cartridges available, does that mean that they really put their own first-party Mario Kart game that's only 23 gigabytes into an entire 64 gigabyte cartridge? And honestly, I feel like the possibility is there. And the thing is, we will know the answer to this when the game does come out, because I'm sure there's going to be somebody out there who's going to get the physical version of Mario Kart World and take apart the cartridge to try to figure out exactly what the capacity of it is. And if that does turn out to be a 64 gigabyte cartridge, then I feel like it's just going to be adding even more credibility to all of this, that Nintendo pretty much only has 64 gigabyte cartridges available when it comes to Switch 2 games. And obviously in Nintendo's case, they don't have to pay themselves any money for using their own cartridges, so they're saving the money in that sense. And I'm sure they've done all the calculation for like how expensive it was to make this game, the budget for it. Don't forget they're also selling it for $80 and all of that. So I'm sure with all the stuff that they've done and calculated, they know that they're still making a lot of money off of this game, and it's going to be perfectly fine for them even if they're using a 64 gigabyte cartridge. But yeah, it seems likely that this is the reason why so many games are appearing as game key cards on the Nintendo Switch 2. And I am really hoping that as we get more into this generation, maybe Nintendo can start offering other cartridges again that have different sizes, and we can start seeing more games actually be fully on the cartridge, because I think that would just be amazing for everyone and a lot of people would really like that. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely be sure to click that like button and also subscribe to the channel as well. I'm definitely gonna have some more videos talking about the Nintendo Switch 2, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. Comment down below and let me know what you think about this. How do you guys feel about this being the reason why so many games are appearing as game keycard games? Does this kind of disappoint you a little bit? How do you feel about everything? Definitely be sure to comment down below and let me know. But if you don't have anything to say about it, just comment your favorite emoji down below for some engagement. I would really appreciate it. Go follow me on Twitter at Aero so you can be featured in videos, and also join my Discord server as well. We've got a bunch of people in there who are always talking about Pokemon and Smash Bros and Nintendo, so definitely be sure to join that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching.